I'm going to tell you the story of when my friends and I went camping and came face to face with what I can only describe as a monster. I'm an outdoorsy type of guy. I love hiking, hunting, bird watching, rock climbing, river swimming, sex under the stars in the back of my Jeep, all that stuff. I camped often, and I was very familiar with the forests of Oregon. I knew what animals could hurt me, how I could deter them, and which plant wouldn't put me in a hospital if I ate them. So when I planned a routine camping trip with 3 of my buddies, mostly to get my girlfriend breaking up with me out of my mind, I was thinking it'd be fun. Some beer, hunting, a little more beer, laughing, more beer. You know. I was wrong. It all started the first night we were out there. Christian had taken us on some really extreme hiking trails, as he described it. One that the 3 of us had never been on. None of us were really scared. We were all mid-20s guys in great shape, so we figured if Chris knew the way, we'd be fine. And we were. We set up camp after falling just a bit short of our 10-mile goal we started out with in the morning. We were happy to sit down and lighten our cooler a bit by having a few beers. Fast forward to a few hours, and more than a few beers later, we were shouting and carrying on as the campfire licked the darkness away from our circle. Any animal noises we heard were shrugged off. No animal in their right mind would dare come near a commotion like this. But suddenly we heard something that wasn't an animal noise. We all paused as Jared raised his hand and turned his head so his ear was pointing towards the sound. It was the sound of tires rolling over fallen leaves and branches. Unmistakably conjoined with the low hum of a running engine, we all reached for our weapons. We each had a hunting rifle that we suddenly all had in our laps. You might think this to be a bit extreme, but you never know what crazy, wrong-turn lunatics you're going to run into in the woods past midnight. And besides, the sound of the tires was close, coming towards us. The most off-putting thing, though, beyond our fire, was the inky blackness of night. No headlights. We were all silent. The noise was just beyond the tree line of the small clearing we were in now. A car door opened, the jingling of keys. A car door closed, then footsteps. A clearer crunching of foliage and fallen branches. I had enough. I raised my rifle towards the sound. They had to be just barely out of sight now, so we were very clearly in theirs. "What do you want?" I asked clearly and sternly, my rifle still pointing in the general direction of the noise. 2 palms were the first thing I saw coming out of the darkness, followed by the form of a frail-looking old man walking out of the darkness below them. He had his hands raised in the air, as if I was a cop about to arrest him. I'd wave a white flag, but the only thing white I got is my drawers, he said with a warm smile, broken up by the fact that he was missing about half of his teeth. I lowered my rifle. He slowly made his way out of the ring of twilight that our fire had created against the backdrop of the near full moon sky. He was a caricature. A gray beard hung off of his chin, but bushed out further, then dropped off his face. It was the kind of beard that you would think you'd accidentally eat more than you would trim. He wore a red and black plaid shirt, and dirty, faded jeans, big black oversized rubber boots, and a decrepit-looking Cabela's hat to try and contain the thin and frail hair that stuck out from under it and shot off in every direction. There he stood, big goofy grin still on his face. "Mind if I join you fellas for a spell?" He spoke in a thick accent, somewhere in the south I couldn't place. "Why are you here in the woods with no headlights on?" Chris trailed off as he looked at his watch. "Almost 2 a.m., he finished. The mysterious hillbilly stranger took a seat on one of the particular big pieces of firewood that Duncan had lugged over. "Well, I'm out here 'cause you out here, son." My grip tightened on my rifle again, but I didn't move it. "The fuck does that mean?" Duncan chimed in with his usual tough guy bravado as he leaned forward in his camping chair. "I'm here because you fellas don't know these trees too good. I'm here to tell you that you're wandering into the big guy's territory," he said as he spoke with his hands. "So you're the big guy then, I take it," I said, almost laughing. No, son. I ain't no monster. But this thing is," he said vaguely. "There's a monster in the woods?" I asked blatantly and bluntly, trying to make it very clear with my tone that I knew he was full of shit. But then Jared had to get him going. What's it look like?" Jared asked, none of my skepticism present in his voice. Teeth. About as big as your forearm, I'd say. He got dark leathery skin. Natives call it tree shaker. Big as your house," he rhymed off. "Not as big as my house," Duncan interrupted again. "Listen, buddy, I don't believe you. And even if I did, there isn't anything in these woods Sheila and I can't handle," he said as he patted his rifle in his lap. He named his gun. Of course he did. "Listen, son. I don't give a care if you believe me or not. I'm just being a good citizen out here in these United States and telling you that your being out here is dangerous." His voice grew more grim as he spoke. "He ain't like other animals. Never seen him spooked. He likes hooting and hollering like you fellas are doing. Fire and light don't scare him neither. As far as that pea shooter goes, you better bring some military-grade firepower if you're gonna hurt him," he warned gravely. I still wasn't buying it. "Listen, buddy, you've got nothing to worry about now. We're gonna shack up and get some sleep, and we'll be on the move shortly after sunrise," I told him. "Now get out of here, you old windbag," Duncan finished for me. The old man stood up from his wooden perch and gave an exacerbated sigh. "All right, boys, all right. Don't bother running if he sees you." He shook his head as he turned away and began to walk back to his vehicle. "Damn thing ran my old Jeep down," he continued as he walked. "That was a nice fucking Jeep, too. Real good Jeep." He continued about his long-gone Jeep as his voice disappeared into the trees. We heard his tires roll away slowly, and once more, we were alone. "Well, that killed the mood," Chris said flatly. The sun rose on an uneventful morning. We all greeted the daylight with the usual grogginess that 7 or 8 beers tend to bring on. There were some murmurs about the crazy old man from last night, myself included. It was a pretty weird interaction. We didn't dwell on it too long, though, and started moving again. We planned to continue hiking for another 5K to get to this ridge that Chris kept talking about. Amazing view, apparently. Every time an animal crossed our path, some joke would pop up about the old guy from the night before. "This monster hides your Jeep. It's the old dude's wife." Stuff like that. The one that got the biggest laugh was when Duncan jumped back when a bird flew out of a tree over our heads. "Look out, it's the tree shaker," he announced in an Ace Ventura kind of style. At the very least, the late-night interaction had given us something to carry on about. We continued all morning until we stopped for lunch. About 2 bites into my chicken sandwich, I stopped chewing, thinking I heard something. I waited. There it was again. It was like I didn't hear the original sound, just the echo. I shushed everyone and told them to listen. Once again, an echo. "What's that?" "You're the bird guy," Jared asked me because of my bird-watching background. He was right. It did sound like a bird. Bigger, though. And definitely not just a bird. There was a ferocity behind it, akin to a lion's roar. "Whatever it is, it's far off," I replied. After all, we could barely hear it. "It's probably just a wounded animal. They make all kinds of crazy sounds when they're dying," Duncan responded. Seemed to make sense. And Duncan was even more of an outdoorsman than me. So we decided he was right. A few more minutes of eating, and we were back on the road. It was uneventful for a while. Chris kept saying how we were almost there. It's just another few hours, but he was right on with his directions. We came to the crest of the mythological ridge. It was a sight to behold. The land dipped down into a shadow valley and then up again into a dwarf mountain. Trees and plants bloomed right into the horizon, and a river ran through the valley. We figured it was a good enough place to set up camp. As we were laying out our sleeping bags, Jared called everyone over to look over the edge again. There it was, clear as day. 3 or 4 trees all in a bunch had just shook violently. I hate to say it, but all those trees are definitely shaking, Jared said, some fear in his voice. We were quiet for a little while. Probably a bear orgy. Yeah, bear orgy. Duncan and Chris both joked and agreed with each other so quickly I wasn't even sure who said what. Their confidence and levity seemed to win over Jared. His brief moment of fright seemed to have passed. Everyone got back to setting up camp. I kept an eye on the trees, though. They were still shaking, but the shaking trees were moving, like something just walking through was shaking them. I never mentioned the fact that the other trees were moving. I put it out of my mind. It was another night of beer and good times. We were loud and rambunctious again. God, what a time. We shut down around 3 o'clock. I went to bed happy. I woke up terrified. Once again, I heard that weird call from the distance. I sat up. The smoldering fire illuminated everyone just enough to let me know none of them heard it. Maybe I was just hearing things. I laid back down. I couldn't sleep, though. I was sure I heard it. Then I heard the footsteps off in the distance. Far, but closing in. Don't bother trying to run from it. The old man's words rang in my head, so I stayed where I was. I didn't wake anyone up. I didn't make a sound. Its footsteps were getting closer. It was walking directly towards us. It sounded so heavy, like it was made out of cast iron. The footsteps grew so loud, I couldn't believe no one else was hearing them. Eventually, they slowed down, but it was literally right next to us. I held my breath. I chose the worst position to sleep in. The crown of my head was pointing towards it as I laid there. I was totally and utterly useless. I couldn't even see the thing that was about to eviscerate me. Just beyond the tree line, it started its calculated steps. It crushed huge branches as it walked. It sounded like an elephant walking on a field of chicken bones. Suddenly, Duncan stirred and looked over in my direction. What the fuck? Holy fuck! He screamed as he tried to scramble to his feet. The beast lunged past me and towards Duncan. The weight of its foot landing next to me almost made me bounce off the ground. What happened next was a blur. Primal fear took over me as I clambered out of my sleeping bag and to my feet as I darted into the woods. I didn't know if it got Duncan. I didn't know where Jared and Chris were. I didn't know where I was running. But I ran faster than any person has ever ran. It seemed like an eon before I found another break in the trees. But it was probably only a few minutes of sprinting. I came upon a gravel road. My socked feet weren't much protection from a jagged rock that shot into my foot. I shrieked in anguish before remembering my situation. I stifled any more noise, and as I was looking at my injured foot once again, I heard the footsteps. About 50 feet in front of me, it emerged from the tree line once again. It stood in the middle of the gravel road, looking away from me, so big that even standing in the center of the road, its thick tail was still in the bushes. The full moon illuminated it perfectly. No, it couldn't be. As the leaves it loosened from the surrounding trees fluttered down between us, it turned to me, almost in cinematic slow motion. There it stood. A Tyrannosaurus Rex. Anyway, yeah, I ran away. We all got away, actually. Except Duncan. He's dead as hell.